U.S. History Regents Review, Unit 3, Video 3. We're talking about westward expansion and how the expansion west for white settlers caused a lot of conflict with the Native Americans who occupied that western land. And as white settlers continue to move west, Indians who face them have three options. As I like to kind of summarize it. They have three options. They can move, they can fight back, or they can assimilate into white culture. So an example of being moved, the United States government created the reservation system. Indians were forced to accept treaties that moved them into small spaces of land provided by the federal government. And this is a little map of where a bunch of those reservations are. So the dark spaces, you'll notice they're mostly out west. This is a big one. They're usually in land that kind of sucks because the federal government didn't really want it. So like this area is the Southwest. There's a lot of desert. So it's not like they're giving them great farmland. It's just space for them to occupy to not get in the way and have conflicts with settlers anymore. And one way that they were convinced to move to these reservations is because their way of life was coming to an end. It was the policy of the federal government and also just the practice of a lot of the settlers to hunt and kill buffalo, either so they could take their hides, which were valuable, or their tongues, which was good meat, or just for fun while riding the railroads, just shooting a bunch with a gun from the railroads. And this horrifying picture is of buffalo skulls. This is a gigantic pile of them because they had killed them, so much so that they almost went extinct. They went from being just like thousands and thousands of buffalo roaming the Great Plains to like a couple hundred. That population eventually does return, but some of the point was, well, if we kill the buffalo, that's a way to get rid of the Indians, essentially. And as they became hungry and dependent, they can continue their nomadic lifestyle following the herds. They had to kind of be forced to accept these agreements to go on reservations where the government would give them food rations. There were instances of fighting back. The Indian Wars on the Great Plains left many dead. There's several examples of this. The most famous are the Battle of Little Bighorn. General Custer, who was stupid, attempted to ambush like thousands of Native Americans with his small group. And of course, he's defeated. He was wildly outnumbered. Sitting Bull was the chief. And while this gets the nickname Custer's Last Stand, to think of him as a poor martyr, in reality, the Native Americans are seriously punished for this. And then there were many massacres as well. The most famous one, the massacre of Wounded Knee. Basically, Americans just went in and like killed 200 innocent like men, women, and children. So there was a lot of violence, and as conflict built, people took it out on Native American groups. So the Indian Wars, it was kind of a last attempt to fight back, and they do not go well. The third option is assimilation. Assimilation, you can see that word similar right in there. The goal is to destroy Indian culture and tribal bonds so that Indians will blend into American society. Assimilation is the process of basically all becoming the same. There should be no difference between any cultures, but the culture that everyone should be is white American culture. So how do they achieve this? One way they try to do this is through the Dawes Act. And the idea is we can break the tribes up and get rid of reservations by instead just granting individual Indians and their families land to go farm and granting them citizenship if they're willing to leave their tribes and do this. Well, some people wanted to do this in good faith. What it ends up doing is taking away even more Indian land, and most of the Indians did not want to do this and did not accept these terms. And then another way, perhaps a more cruel way, is through the idea of Indian boarding schools. The federal government set up these schools, and the goal was to strip Native children of their cultural identities. And they would do this by changing their clothing, forcing them to speak only English, forget their native languages, and change their names. And they would probably take photos to show you like before and after, to show the ways that they had civilized all of these children. And it was a really traumatic experience for many of them. It's document time. Let's hear the thoughts of one of the people who ran these boarding schools. And his name is Captain Richard Pratt. And this is 1892. And his speech, which he gave at a convention, was called "Kill the Indian, Save the Man." A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this: that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. So let's think about what he's saying here. His main point is like, I don't think we should actually kill Indians. Isn't that nice? But what he wants to do is kill the Indian within this person and save the man. So let's see what he means by that. And I've cut a lot out of this speech, so this is just a chunk. It is a great mistake to think that the Indian is born an inevitable savage. He is born a blank, like all the rest of us. Left in the surroundings of savagery, he grows to possess a savage language, superstition, and life. We, left in the surroundings of civilization, grow to possess a civilized language, life, and purpose. Transfer the infant white to the savage surroundings, he will grow to possess a savage language, superstition, and habit. Transfer the savage born infant to the surroundings of civilization, and he will grow to possess a civilized language and habit. This is Pratt trying to make an argument for his boarding schools. He is saying that Indian culture is inherently savage, everything about it. But, it doesn't have to be that way. Every child is a blank, as he calls it, and is really formed by their environment. So if you take these children and you grow them up in civilization, we can successfully get rid of all this savage culture that the Indian has. So while he doesn't want to kill Indians, he wants to kill their culture and destroy it because it's savage. That's how he views it. And this is how most Americans viewed it. So before we move on, I just want to give a Regents tip for you. As you may have noticed, everything I've talked about has been really sad and awful for Natives. So any Regents question you see about Native Americans, the answer is always the worst possible option. The Regents wants you to understand that. So you will always get a question about, what was the result of this policy on Native Americans? The answer is always the worst possible thing. Something about destroying their culture, breaking up tribes, forcing them to move, losing out in the Indian Wars. Whatever the worst possible answer is the correct one. I see it on every question.